I'm George Galloway, and I present كلمة on Al Mayadeen television. Here we are in London. I speak my words freely, either in Parliament, on television, here on the streets of London. كلمة means free word. That's what I speak. So كلمة is a two-way conversation. Check it out on Al Mayadeen television. Welcome to كلمة with me, George Galloway, for Al Mayadeen television, coming to you from London with an audience of distinguished experts and one or two enthusiastic amateurs like me. Donald J. Trump, President of the United States of America. Who would have thought it? Well, me, for a start, and one or two other key individuals in the audience. We predicted Donald Trump's victory, and we correctly analysed the reasons, the forces that were propelling him to victory, some of which had to do with him and his appeal, much of which had to do with the distinct lack of appeal of his opponent. Let me put my own cards on the table. I wish it was Bernie Sanders, Senator from Vermont, who was about to take power as the President of the United States of America. I'm not happy that Donald Trump is, but I'm very happy indeed that Hillary Clinton isn't. And you know what? I think there's a lot of people in the world like me who think that way. Of course, Trump could turn out to be a cataclysmic disaster, but we were certain that Hillary Clinton would turn out to be a cataclysmic disaster. And therefore, the possibility that Trump will be less than that and maybe something much better than that definitely exists, both on the domestic and on the international level. Inevitably, given the audience for this show, we'll spend more time on the international. But on the domestic, the reasons why Trump won the swing states in what they insultingly call the Rust Belt of the United States was because those very states had become Rust Belts for the reason of the neoliberal economic policies of the Clintons. The factories, the great industries, the millions of blue-collar industrial workers, skilled workers, had been beggared by the economic agenda of people like Bill Clinton and Hillary Clinton. The international trade agreements that they concluded, NAFTA in particular, but others coming up behind them, like the free trade agreement with the European Union, like the free trade agreements in the Asia-Pacific region, all spelt more disaster for industrial America. And if you have no industry, as Britain has found, then other things simply cannot compensate. And Hillary Clinton didn't even campaign in those states because she couldn't, because the workers would have chased her out of town. Trump, on the other hand, was saying, if you ship jobs out of America, I'll slap tariffs on you, which will make it very difficult for you to sell your product in the USA. Now, he may or may not live up to that. He may or may not live up to his pledge to pave America with infrastructural improvements paid for by the state, and to hell with the deficit, because America needs that and because it will put people back to work. These things may or may not happen, but the possibility that they could happen was the domestic reason why Trump was victorious. On the international level, I'm absolutely, unashamedly clear. I think that Trump's policy of peace with Russia, of joint efforts against the worst people on the earth, ISIS and Al-Qaeda, is a winning card for me. And if Trump lives up to that pledge, and recent developments indicate that he will, his appointment of someone as Secretary of State with warm personal relations with President Putin and with a long track record of work in Russia indicates that he will live up to that policy pledge to end the ever-increasing policy of confrontation with Russia. As a matter of fact, Hillary Clinton is now claiming that it was the Russians what won it for Trump. She's claiming that President Putin, some Mephistophelian genius he must be, is responsible for Trump's victory, for Britain leaving the European Union, for François Fillon becoming the Gaullist candidate for president of France, and many other things. Well, if it's true that President Putin is so good at fixing elections, I'm not sure why we had to suffer 8 years of Barack Obama. But it's not a clear picture, because whilst Trump is aiming at good relations with Russia, he's going out of his way to sow division and bad relations with China. He's threatening to scrap the Iran nuclear deal. And he's just made someone his ambassador to Tel Aviv, or is it Jerusalem? That we'll have to consider and discuss, who is so hawkish he might as well be a member of Netanyahu's party, and indeed he may even be. So we cannot look forward to unblemished, uninterrupted, good times on the international level. But we surely can look forward to an end to America's support for ISIS and Al-Qaeda in Syria and elsewhere in the world. We surely can look forward to an end to the NATO build-up, confronting Russia, moving their tanks onto Russia's lawn and threatening the entire peace of the world. Now, if I was right about Donald Trump, this man in front, whom you remember from previous shows, Charlie Wolf, who's one of the main voices for Trump, not just in Britain but in the Western world, he fought a blinder of a campaign. And I hope they reward you for it, Charlie. They should get you out to the White House and make you the press secretary, if you ask me. So lots of people like that in the audience who know what they're talking about. And let's hear from the first of them. Yes, sir.
Thank you, George. I remember that we met in Water Lily in a program, and thank you very much for your introduction. You have said many things together, but I would like to draw your attention first on Middle East policy of Trump, and later I will tell you about his policy towards China and Southeast Asia. The Middle East policy, as I have seen, that I researched some researchers, that Robert said that Trump policy includes he will destroy ISIS, as you have already said, ISIS, getting tough on Iran, strengthening old alliances with Israel and Egypt, and compelling traditional partners to spend more on their defense needs. And regarding Israel-Palestinian problem, he is coming with new approach, and he is saying about reconciliation. Trump wants to make peace with Israel and Palestinians, and he said that I would love to be able to be the one that made peace with Israel and the Palestinians. He added, I have reason to believe I can do it. And we researched that from Franklin Roosevelt, what he did with King Abdulaziz with Saudi Arabia, and the thing is that he is saying that he will make a surprise in Israel-Palestinian problem to solve the problem. And there are also other issues, Shia-Kurdish negotiations, and Kurdistan in Baghdad during Trump presidency. He has a plan, he will declare it. And regarding Syria, although he is saying that he will make a peace with Russia, but he has a plan to ask both Iran and Russia to make peace, and if not, then he will penalize them. And I will discuss other issues of Trump later. I think if you now respond on these issues, including Palestinian and Israeli problems, the long-standing problems of the world, I can tell you that you know also on this. Thank you. Go on.
Thank you. Look, he always says he's got a plan. That's usually a means of avoiding telling you what he's going to do. And that's because he doesn't know what he's going to do. My impression of Trump, he doesn't know what he's going to do 1 minute before he does it. He doesn't know what he's going to say 1 second before he says it. So it's a good tactic. I wish I could get away with it in my own political life. I have a plan. I'm not going to tell you what the plan is, but elect me and you'll see I have a plan. I don't believe that he has a plan to solve the Israel-Palestine crisis. Nobody else has managed to solve it. So I don't imagine that Donald Trump will solve it. I have said here before, let me repeat it, I believe that on Israel-Palestine, Trump will be worse than Obama, but not nearly as bad as Hillary Clinton would have been. Somewhere between these 2 points will be Trump's policy towards the region. One thing is clear, and Charlie Wolf said it in the last time we discussed this matter, the supporters of Israel in the United States overwhelmingly backed Hillary Clinton. The vast majority of the campaign contributions from the traditionally hawkish pro-Israel money bags in the United States were poured onto Hillary Clinton's campaign, not onto Donald Trump's. So in that sense, he doesn't owe the Israel lobby anything like that which Hillary Clinton would have owed them. So again, it's like on all of this, Trump might not be good, but Clinton definitely would have been bad. So from the point of view of the people watching this, I myself don't think that they should hastily write the Trump presidency off. Secondly, I don't think he likes Saudi Arabia very much. I don't think he likes people like them very much. And in that sense, he didn't receive huge campaign donations from Saudi Arabia, but Hillary Clinton did. 25% of Clinton's campaign money was donated by Saudi Arabia or institutions or individuals linked to it. So that again indicates the Saudis were backing Clinton and may be disappointed in the future. But there's a big contradiction at the heart of all of this. It will not be possible to have good relations with Russia and bad relations with China and Iran, because Russia and China and Iran are one hand, and it will not be possible for Trump to pick his friends in that gallery. So I'm hoping that the good relations with Russia will help to temper some of the rhetoric against China and against Iran. It's time. I've mentioned them twice already. Let's hear from Charlie Wolf, the prominent
Before giving to Charlie, just supplementary, that I have also predicted from the day one that Trump will win this time because Hillary is the bad choice. I agree with you. And my identity, as I was the former minister and advisor to the President of Bangladesh, and also I do research, and I'm an editor and political analyst. Thank you. My name is Mukhlis Chaudhry. Thank you.
Thank you, Mukhlis. I appreciate that. Charlie.
Well, it's not often you and I are this simpatico on issues. It's almost getting scary. We've been together on this. I think we also have the same views on Brexit. Yes, I think it was obvious that Trump was going to win. And the reason why is first off, he was very much in touch with the people, because to be a developer and to be a TV producer, etc., you have to understand your audience and know what they're looking for and give that to them. Politicians, I think, are in their own little world. Hillary was in a bubble. And was very quick to write off Trump. Everybody was like, the guy's stupid. You know, he's a TV guy. Remember this line? When I was in the bunker helping to get, kill off bin Laden, he was hosting Celebrity Apprentice. Well, it's still a job. The guy's making money. That's the role he took. That's the role she took. So she was totally out of touch. It was the worst campaign I think I've ever seen. I have high hopes. I have very high hopes. I think I'll talk domestic first, just briefly.
Yes.
Domestically, I think you will have a boom for the next not 10, not 15, but 25 years. Now, this is according, I had lunch, I was part of a small lunch group with Arthur Laffer about a week ago. Laffer, of course, you would probably understand, the man who invented the Laffer curve.
Yes.
And was the chief economic advisor to Ronald Reagan. And he said if Trump does what he says he's going to do, and stays away from the one or two issues like protectionism, he says the economy will boom, and will boom even better than it did in the Reagan years. And I think, obviously Laffer knows what he's talking about. So I see good things. I think also on the international stage, because he does not come from this sort of school of politics, he works outside of it, and it's going to upset a lot of people. The people within the cognoscenti within the realm, but people will know what he's talking about. He's not going to give this line of, well, I'm going to stay even-handed. I'm not going to get into Israel and Palestine per se, but at least there's someone that says, this is where I stand. They're an ally, this is where I stand. Now, at least you have someone you can talk to because you know where they are. I would rather that than this kind of line of, well, we're an equal partner, we're in the middle. No, let's have some truth amongst people. Then we can sit down at the table and try and negotiate. So I don't think Israel is something I see as a top line issue, but it just gives an idea of where he's going to go. Looking at his cabinet, again, as a businessman, as a CEO, you pick people that can do the job. And if you look at how he's done it, the process he's gone through and the people he's picked, I think Tillerson is the Secretary of State. Well, first off, it was a surprise because everybody was expecting Romney. And at the last minute, Tillerson was not on the list. It was Bob Gates, the former Secretary of Defense under Bush and under Obama, recommended this guy. Condi Rice backed it up, and I think there's several other people that have backed Tillerson. Here's a guy who has been working with leaders all over the world, I think about, 26 countries, I think it is, as a businessman. He knows these people. He knows how to make deals. He knows how to have strategic vision, and he's outside of the system. So he's going to bring in a new light, and I think you'll see very good. That, to me, was just about the best choice, I think, that I've seen. Other people in the cabinet, Secretary of Defense, he's got a guy named Mad Dog. Now, how often do you see that?
That's not very encouraging.
I think it's great. I mean, can you imagine?
Name is Mad Dog.
Well, can you imagine? Think back to when you were in high school, maybe, and you were the wimpy little kid, and you said you're getting beat up. And says, "Excuse me, just a minute." And you pick up your cell phone and you ring. And you go, "Hi, is Mad Dog there?" And the bullies went, "Mad Dog? Who's? Oh, that's my friend. He's a bit mad." Can you imagine? I don't think it would happen like this. But you imagine sitting in some sort of a meeting with the Saudis or whomever, someone that's not participating, they're being very obstreperous. He says, "Give me the phone for just a second." "Yeah, get me Mad Dog." And the person in the meeting goes, what is a Mad Dog? What do you, he's like, "Oh, he's my Secretary of Defense." So, and by the way, it's easy to kind of take the mickey here. Mattis is a highly well-read, erudite man who, again, is for the soldiers. He's a soldier, a Marine's Marine. He is the type of guy that even today, as a civilian, would probably go in at the front of the troops, and lead them in. So he's a soldier. The guy that's going to be taking care of Health and Human Services has been fighting against Obamacare for the last 8 years. So he's going to replace it, and he knows how to do it. That's all he's been doing in life. I'll mention just one other cabinet pick. I can't remember his name, but the one he's got for the EPA, Environmental Protection, has been fighting environmental protection for years. Now, people get a little bit confused on this. They say, well, this guy's a climate denier. Well, how can you have him running the EPA, the Environmental Protection Agency? Well, the problem is with the last people, they thought it was their role to set policy. It's not. This man, the person in that role, is an administrator. He's supposed to do what the law says. And the reason the guy that they've hired, now again, forgive me, I can't remember his name now, he's been fighting them because they haven't been doing what the law says. They've been trying to make up their own rules. So you're going to get someone in there that's going to do what he's supposed to do. That's going to keep the limited government. So on all sorts of levels, I'm very hopeful.
Well, as always, no one can put lipstick on right-wing politics better than you. I just make the point that when I was a wimpy little kid, the idea of mobile telephones was many decades away, and Al Gore hadn't invented the internet
I know.
yet.
I was using artistic license.
I have to tell you, and we'll hear from a real expert in this field, Charles Shoebridge, in a minute. We are not afraid of the United States. You should feed that back to your friends in Washington. Not only are we not afraid of them anymore, we don't actually respect them very much either. So if you want us to respect you, then you have to follow a better policy than previous presidents have done. The days when a guy called Mad Dog sent shivers down our spines died with John Wayne. America's soft power has never been lower. If Trump does a good job, he will build that soft power bank of capital up. If he does a bad job, I say to you as someone who's been in the anti-America business for 50 years myself, there has never been a better opportunity to mobilize the entire world against an American president than there is in the form of Donald Trump. And that's why we end up on the same line from entirely different perspectives. Because my line is this: either Trump does what he says he's going to do, in which case it will be better for America and better for the world, or, on the other hand, if he doesn't, then it will be easier than it has ever been to mobilize international opinion against them. And America will be even more isolated than it has been. After the break, we'll hear from Charles Shoebridge, who is a defense and security expert of great reputation and note, and I'm going to be asking him whether Mad Dog Mateless is going to continue moving America's tanks around the world, taking us closer and closer to a potentially nuclear confrontation, or whether, as Charlie indicates, having a Mad Dog in reserve might actually allow you to be a bit more peaceful in the world than your country has been of late. This is كلمة with me, George Galloway, on Al Mayadeen Television. You're watching كلمة with me, George Galloway, on Al Mayadeen Television, coming to you from London, discussing Donald Trump, President Donald Trump, and what it means for the world. We took the Al Mayadeen كلمة camera out onto the roads of London to find out what the people thought. Take a look at this.
Trump campaign pledge was to make America great again. What do you think that means?
From the voters' perspective, I mean the people that voted for Trump, I think it means bring back the power to the American people.
He wanted to completely redo the system, bring a lot of the power, at least from his campaign, away from the central government and more back to the, quote, working class people. Not sure if that will hold to standards, but that's at least, I believe, what his perspective was.
It means bringing the former glory of their country back, the well-being of citizens and their back old position in the world.
In a way, he was kind of capitalizing on sort of growing cynicism and general sort of dissatisfaction with the state of the economy, particularly for sort of middle classes and lower income groups.
Do you think building a wall with Mexico on refugees and illegal immigrants will help good race relations in the US?
No, I don't.
I think we shouldn't be building walls. I think we should be breaking down walls and creating conversations rather than sticking people in corners.
I think it would be in some way good for Americans, but not so extreme as building a wall.
So it would probably make more sense to do a sort of state-by-state policy rather than a federal level kind of wall.
federal level wall. What an interesting concept. Just before I go to Charles Shoebridge, our defence and security expert, I savagely attacked Charlie Wolf before the break, and he wants to reply, and this is كلمة after all. Charlie.
I wouldn't say it was savage, but it was. I just wanted to point out that, you know, I agree with you no matter what you're saying. You want to bring people along with you, and you do that, first off, by being strong. Strong doesn't mean attacking everybody, but you do need to be strong. I think Charles would probably agree with me that diplomacy only works when it's backed up by might. You don't have to use it, but it's there. Teddy Roosevelt said, walk softly but carry a big stick. And I think that's what Mr. Trump, President-elect Trump, is looking at. He wants to make it strong and have the confidence in ourselves and what we stand for, not the apology tour of the Obama years.
Charles, a big stick. Diplomacy backed by might. These kind of words trouble me. It's obvious that the United States has a big stick. It can destroy the whole world many times over, but it can't win the hearts of the world with a big stick. That can only come from the people of the world thinking America is doing the right thing. It's not necessarily your field, but defense and security is your field. It's undoubtedly been the case, and indeed until right now, Barack Obama is hurling insults and accusations at Russia, going around on his farewell tour, trying to cajole and force European leaders into ever more confrontational positions with Russia. Are you hopeful that that will change?
I think I agree entirely with what you said at the beginning, which is that for people who are interested in actually promoting stability in the world and thereby promoting peace, justice, trade, and all the other things that are absolutely dependent on stability and security, it's a great relief that Clinton is not coming to the White House. You've got a situation with Trump. He's the big unknown. Even after he's appointed key members of his cabinet, even after he's given more detail on some of his policies or the plans that we as yet don't know about, there is still a lot of room for optimism there, I think. Clinton lost largely because, or I would say that Trump lost largely because of the negative vote for Clinton. Clinton was the establishment figure. Clinton was backed up not just by the establishment, but she was shown by, for example, the WikiLeaks revelations to be a deeply flawed, dishonest, and even allegedly, and I say allegedly, but there's a lot to back it up, corrupt individual with lots of money, as you've mentioned earlier, coming in from Saudi Arabia and so on. And it's worth noting that that money was also coming in when she was Secretary of State, which meant that when you look at the graphs, or when you look at the, because this is a defense field, when you look at, for example, some highly questionable arms export licenses that were given by the State Department at that time, they went up by an order of something like 10 to those countries that had donated to her Clinton Foundation at the time that she was Secretary of State. And that really does smell of corruption. But it also means that for the sake of either patronage from these really, in many ways, vile countries such as Qatar, Saudi Arabia, when one looks at their foreign policy, that she has then supported, and of course under Obama, a foreign policy that has created mass instability around the world. It's been very good for, we come back to the big stick, it's been very good for the US arms industries, where you have a situation where not just arms are being exported, but also, of course, you're in a state of constant war, which, of course, boosts the shares of those arms companies. Now, it's interesting because since Trump has been elected, those shares have gone even higher because Trump has said, and he's on record again and again, and of course he's put the fear of terror into many countries, particularly NATO, that he wants them to increase their defence spending to be at least 2% of gross domestic product. Britain is one of the few countries that is just at that level because Trump has said, I want NATO to be responsible for its own security. I don't want America having to spend all the money, lose all the lives if it comes to it, and Europe doesn't do anything. So again, now you've got a big rush of European countries looking now to boost their defence spending, fearful, of course, that Trump may back down in supporting them. Now, this comes back to the big stick issue that Charlie's mentioned. It used to be a policy of the United Kingdom years ago with empire to have that big stick and to use it sometimes hard as well, but sometimes softly. To carry it, the threat is there. I think personally, from a perspective, and again, I was in the military for many years, I declare that interest, that the key problem we've had with American foreign policy, and when we say American foreign policy, inevitably, unfortunately, we mean British foreign policy too, is that America has just had this big stick. We don't mind about that. It's that they've repeatedly used it in a way that is bullying, that is oppressive, and that is utterly counterproductive. Because although America has got this big stick, and as you quite rightly say, can destroy the world and certainly can lay waste to countries, it hasn't shown that it has the ability to mould those countries into either A, what it actually wants for its interests, or B, what it says it wants, which is stable democracies with pluralism and so on. If we look at countries like Syria, Libya, that American foreign policy, using a big stick, largely covertly, in other words, funding arms to jihadist groups and others to combat, for example, Assad in Syria. And again, one goes back to this foreign policy that has been so tied to countries such as Israel, but especially countries like Saudi Arabia and Qatar in supporting these rebels, even though these rebels are nothing to do with democracy and human rights, but supporting them for these geopolitical interests of other actors such as Saudi Arabia. This is the problem for the future. We have a situation with Donald Trump where he is outside the political system. That is a very good thing because it means that people who hate the system vote for him. But it also means that he has a lack of experience in diplomacy, in foreign affairs. This is a big part of his appeal. And so for me, this makes him very vulnerable to outside, or rather inside, advisors, to the think tanks, the academics, so many of whom are funded by people such as Israel or Israeli-linked groups or Saudi Arabia, Qatar, and the media, all of whom profess to be experts and invariably follow that Clinton-esque type foreign policy. And so it really does remain to be seen whether he, especially in relationships with Iran, whether he succumbs to this so-called expertise which is now clamoring at the door to speak with him. And I think he knows that he's vulnerable to that because, for example, he's not taking the intelligence briefings, and he's been criticised for that he's not taking the intelligence briefings now that he's entitled to. But of course, he distrusts the security services of America. And of course, he's got good reason to, especially as you've alluded to, the fact that they are really collaborating with Clinton in a way to suggest that his election was purely at Putin's behest, suggesting that without any evidence to back it up.
A very expert summary indeed, for which I thank you. I just make the point en passant about think tanks and their funding. To my astonishment, just the other day, we discovered that one of the main London think tanks, which has been opining away without our knowledge of its provenance, of the funding of the opinions, turns out to be receiving multi-million-pound secret donations, not from Saudi Arabia or Qatar, but from a very third-rate Gulf country, Bahrain. The Bahraini regime has paid, I think it was £25 million to one of the major British think tanks. And none of us knew that.
Let me just say something on that. Great store is placed by the media, by government, by academics on the output of so-called think tanks. And the key word in consideration of these think tanks and the way they market themselves is this word independent. They are called independent think tanks. You will see on the television, certainly on the BBC, Sky, and certainly the American networks, these so-called experts crop up again and again, funnily enough, all saying pretty much exactly the same thing, which is supporting the State Department and the Foreign Office line. And then you find that behind the scenes, these people are actually funded by the very people who they are supporting, supposedly independent on television. You have mentioned the IISS, this very highly respected think tank. It's actually, you're right, £25 million, 1/3 of its entire income. What about the rest of its funding? You know, a lot of other secret deals we don't know about. Chatham House is another highly respected, and of course many of its scholars are indeed highly respected and highly reputable. But nonetheless, it receives funding from the Ministry of Defence, from arms companies, from, for example, its Syria programme. And again, these are so-called independent experts, largely funded by a Syrian opposition magnate who also supports the Syria campaign and the white helmets and all that. And so you've got whenever, I mean, we all know this probably anyway, but for the viewers, it's absolutely important. Whenever you see some expert on TV, and of course I include myself, you need to look at who is pulling the strings, who are the funders. I would say I have no funding straight away.
You definitely don't. I know that because you're always asking me for £25 to appear.
Every little helps, George.
You're that rare example of a genuinely independent man. Now, let me ask you something that flows directly from what you said. For the first time, certainly in my memory, and I think the first time in history since the founding of the United States, we appear to be entering an era where the United States is less warlike, or going to be, less bent on confrontation with another superpower, another major power in the world, than Britain is. I, like you, or like the allusion that you made, believe that, that Britain doesn't have an independent foreign policy. It cannot have, because it goes around the world threatening people with America's big stick. It doesn't have a big stick itself. Yep. It goes like Mussolini used to go around threatening people with Hitler's army. That's what British foreign policy is. But early signs are that whilst President-elect Trump is calling for less war, less sanctions, less confrontation, the British government appears to be doubling down on its demand for supporting all the policies that have led us to this disastrous pass.
You're absolutely right, and it's a very interesting thing to look at the Syrian situation, for example. We can see on the ground that the winds of change are very much against the Syrian rebels, the opposition, Al-Qaeda, whatever we want to call them, from different perspectives. Britain's position has not changed on this, but Britain is a country that is particularly enthralled, particularly under the spell of countries such as Bahrain, you mentioned. It's a third-rate country, as you say, but its rulers are incredibly wealthy. And they have, of course, the British bases there. The American, I think it's the Fifth Fleet is based in Bahrain, so it's a very important place.
And we've just opened a base there for the first time since the 1960s.
Absolutely right, which sends a message to them. Also, of course, many people view Bahrain, notwithstanding, of course, it's a majority Shia population, ruled by Sunni king, but many people view it, perhaps cynically, perhaps realistically, as an extended province of Saudi Arabia. Let's not forget it was Saudi Arabia that put down the pro-democracy demonstrations there, backed by the United Kingdom and our media that looked away. So you've got countries like Saudi Arabia and Qatar, very important for Britain domestically. You see how even in their campaign in Yemen, Saudi Arabia killing so many thousands of civilians, our governments and our media so keen to condemn Assad or Russia, but not keen at all to condemn Saudi Arabia doing the same thing. And so you've got a situation now where...
You know, Qatar owns 20% of London, yeah? Qatar owns 19% of all the property in London.
And Saudi Arabia a lot as well as this as well. And we get
our embassy now.
We get a third of our gas.
Embassy, yes.
We get a vast amount of our gas, for example, from Qatar. And of course, we sell, for example, half of our arms exports now go to Saudi Arabia that are then used in Yemen. But what's interesting, I agree absolutely with what you said, that especially now when we look back to another thing you mentioned earlier, it's not just on the ground that the winds of change are really affecting geostrategic situations. You've got a grand movement in politics away from this field of confrontation or this area of confrontation. You've got Trump elected in America, obviously the most important. You've got either Fillon or Le Pen are going to be, one of those two is likely to be the president of France. France has been utterly, along with Britain and America, interventionist in the world. This is going to change. In smaller countries, Romania, Moldova, Bulgaria, you've got winds of change where they're electing people who they don't say they're pro-Russian, they say we don't want to be anti-Russian. And so my worry is that behind the scenes, because of Trump's inexperience, you will have all of the British old school imperial diplomacy at work in trying to persuade Trump and his advisors to follow Britain's line. Because at the moment, it's looking in 2017 that Britain is going to be isolated. And I fear that actually because Trump has surrounded himself with advisors who, for example, are very anti-Iranian, that will give, if you like, an inner for Britain to actually persuade him to carry on, perhaps covertly, for example, funding rebels and so on. It remains to be seen.
Well, that's what you call a distinguished expert. Charles Shoebridge, our security and defence speaker, here in this great debate on كلمة حرة. Thank you. You're watching كلمة with me, George Galloway, for Al-Mayadeen Television, coming to you from London, talking about Donald Trump. Will Donald Trump make America great again? And what does great mean? Does it mean a bigger stick? Or does it mean more people in the world respecting and even loving you? Well, let's hear what the public thought out on the streets when we took the كلمة camera downtown.
How do you think Trump will help the Middle East peace process?
I don't think he will. I think for the first couple of years at least, he will sort of need to get a grip and actually understand some of the issues. Seems like he's not that knowledgeable in world affairs.
Maybe cooperating with Russia more, and just, it needs better managing, better organizing, and cut the civilian loss.
How do you think Trump will help the Middle East peace process?
I don't think he will help. I mean, he's a very unpredictable man, so from what I can tell, he can only damage.
I think Trump could definitely do a better job in greatening those conflicts and not doing a good job in making conversations and yet again playing the we and them type card.
Will there be a rise of racism after Trump?
No.
Definitely, I think we've already seen that due to a lot of people in the news we've heard of that have been harassed by Trump's, in the name of Trump.
You can't pin it all on Trump, but I do think he kind of has given some of those voices legitimacy, and they now feel more confident to sort of come out with quite extreme views.
Because he was voted president, this validates like racist opinions. So people will feel more encouraged to express their racist point of views.
A varied set of opinions there. The Middle East, will he make it better? Will he make it worse? Could it get very much worse? These are the questions we're discussing in London today. And let's hear from the latest of our distinguished experts. Yes, sir. Introduce yourself.
My name is Frankie Bontemps. I'm a representative of the Chagosian community based here in the UK. And a little story about our struggle, like how in the late 1960s, like a whole population of 2,000 people have been forced to exile from their homeland by the US with the complicity of the UK government, and how during those 50 years we're still fighting to go back, and still our rights been denied by both of them. So today, as you said earlier, like Mr. Trump, he's not from the traditional political establishment. We hope that there will be a change in the foreign policy of the US, that at least they could give the Chagosian people their fundamental rights, which is the right to live in their homeland. Because what's happening it's like a fight between David and Goliath. Yeah, all this time we're fighting against two superpowers. We all have helpless people. We don't have any means, but all the time, all the case been in court. But unfortunately, in court, who you're facing, who's controlling everything. It's them. But here, as today we have the opportunity to speak, I hope that there's a big audience like listening to us. We hope that our plight, that Mr. Trump, at least there will be a change in his foreign policy, that justice will prevail. Yeah.
Britain gave away the Chagos Islands to the United States military for their base at Diego Garcia, where it was used at least for transition, for the extradition of torture victims and murder victims. If Trump pulls in America's horns and ceases to be a behemoth going around the world attacking people, it may be that they won't need Diego Garcia anymore, and that after 50 years you may be able to go home. So shame on the British government, first and foremost, for giving away your homeland and shipping you off to the rain and cold of England. Thank you very much for that contribution. Who else would like to speak? Anyone who's not been in yet? Yes, go ahead, sir.
Hi, George. For those of us on the left in the West, what would you believe the biggest positive that could come from a Trump presidency?
It would be the absence of war. The absence of war is not peace, but the presence of war makes peace and justice and progress completely impossible. I am firmly of the view, as Dr. Jill Stein, the candidate I had to end up supporting, the Green Party candidate, described Hillary Clinton as a mushroom cloud waiting to happen. I believe that she was bought and paid for by the worst people in the world. She was utterly committed to a policy of escalation, of conflict and confrontation with Russia in particular, and that could only have led to war, because if I'm not frightened of the United States anymore, be sure that President Putin isn't frightened of the United States. And there could only have been an outbreak of hot war somewhere, perhaps everywhere, between the United States and Russia if Hillary Clinton had been the president. I'm very encouraged. I agree with Charlie on so many times now I've agreed with Charlie. I agree with Charlie that the appointment of the new Secretary of State is the best one. There were others that were on the table, not just Romney, but Bolton and Giuliani and others, that would have been disastrous picks. But I think that Tillerson is a very wise pick, a man who is like Trump outside of the political inner circle. And so from the point of view of the left, I think that, that Trump could be a good thing for America, could be a good thing for the world. But our task in our countries is to stop regarding the United States as our boss, let alone our father, or worse, some kind of deity. We have to build our own countries and our own alliances and our own ability to operate independently and treat the United States with respect, the respect due to it as a mighty country, a rich, powerful country with a huge population and great achievements. I don't hate America in the slightest. I am the great-grandson of the only woman in the entire 19th century who emigrated from America to Scotland. She got on the wrong boat. Almost certainly she emigrated from New York to Dundee. And if you've ever seen New York, and if you've ever seen Dundee, you'll realize she must have got on the wrong boat. We don't hate America or want to hate America. As a matter of fact, even when they've got right-wing views like Charlie, I love them. I like Americans. I like their spirit, this can-do spirit. And that's the kind of world we want, where the United States doesn't tell us what to do, and we are able to respect and even love the people of the United States. Who else would like to come in next? Gentleman at the back.
Hi, George. My name's James. It's just a quick query on 3 different islands that Trump can affect and may affect entirely. One is Cuba, one is Taiwan, and one is Chagos, as the gentleman over there referred to earlier. How do you think America will play? These are 3 different distinct islands with 3 different geopolitical significance. How do you think Trump will play this in the coming 4 years? Where do you see this going?
Well, again, I'm hoping as a deal maker. I don't expect him to love any of the Chinese people, the Cuban people, the Chagosians. I don't expect him to love them. I'm not sure that he's a great lover of foreign things and foreign people. He seems to me a quintessential WASP, white Anglo-Saxon Protestant, and in that sense I don't suppose he's ever heard of the Chagos, to be perfectly frank, though he knows he's got a base there that he doesn't really need. And wouldn't it be a nice thing if he said, I don't need this, shut it down and bring the people back? That would win him quite a lot of support around the world. The China policy is potentially extremely dangerous. China is the most powerful country in the world, with the largest armed forces in the world, the largest population in the world, whose hard and soft power is increasing exponentially, which holds more dollars than the United States Treasury itself, which could destroy the economy of the United States overnight, and incidentally boost the euro quite a bit if they were to switch, note to Beijing. And yet Trump went out of his way to deliver a deadly insult to China by taking a call from the so-called president of the so-called state in Taiwan, and then further saying that the one China policy of the US, which has been in place since another Republican president, Richard Nixon, introduced in the 1970s, this recognition of China, which implies automatically the de-recognition of pretender statelets like Taiwan. So the Chinese are hypersensitive people with a very and well-deserved sense of themselves as an important country in the world, and they're not going to be easily insulted. So I'm hoping that Mr. Tillerson will be out there in Beijing pouring some soothing oils on the hurt feelings in Beijing. But if the US gets into a trade war with China, the US will be the loser. Of that I'm absolutely certain. After all, China's population can live with the vicissitudes of economic downturn. They have been on an upward curve for the last 30 years. More people have been lifted out of poverty in China than in any other place in all human history. If the Chinese state says to the Chinese population, we're about to get into a trade war with the United States in defense of our national sovereignty and territorial integrity, the Chinese people will live with that. The same cannot be said for the United States. If the US economy is beggared by a trade war with China, there'll be serious trouble on the streets of the US. Cuba, I'm absolutely certain that Trump will not overturn the tables on Cuba, because it's 4 years at least, maybe never, but it's 4 years at least until he has to worry about votes from the emigre, anti-Cuban voters in Florida and elsewhere in the United States. So committed to the embargo on Cuba was Donald Trump that before the presidential election and before President Obama's so-called limited normalization of relations with Cuba, Trump was negotiating with the Cuban communist leaders to open hotels and other entertainment complexes in the besieged island. I know that, and the Cubans know it, and if Donald Trump doesn't want the whole world to know it, he'd be wise to act carefully and sensibly on this matter. Now, I don't believe that there will be further trouble with Cuba, but China is the big enchilada and is also a real danger. You're watching كلمة with me, George Galloway, in London. You're watching كلمة with me, George Galloway, for Al Mayadeen Television, coming to you from London, discussing Donald Trump. Let's go to our audience here in the studio in London. Yes, sir.
Hi, my name is Luis France, representing the Sagusian people here. As we all know, it seems like there's a new alliance forming between Russia, and we've seen on TV Japan has joined in. At what point do you think that Britain should join in? Because it seems like Britain is hell-bent on turning their back against Russia, and it's heading towards isolation more and more. But at what point Britain would put their pride aside and join in? Because together we can solve a lot of problems. That's how I see it.
No, it's a very good question, and Charles Shoebridge and I touched on it in our earlier exchanges. I stand by what I said. Britain cannot have an independent foreign policy, at least not one that involves confrontation with anybody. The Queen doesn't have enough soldiers to guard Buckingham Palace. We have aircraft carriers with no aircraft on them. The British armed forces are underpaid, ill-equipped, ill-clad, and their families are living in substandard houses. The idea of Britain roaming around the world fighting people is utterly ridiculous. British politicians, windbags, are up on their feet in the British Parliament demanding war, threatening people, warning them. When, talk about big sticks, we're talking chipolata here. We're talking matchsticks. So, in the end, the British foreign policy will have to follow the American foreign policy, because we can't go around the world threatening people with America's army if America doesn't want to use its army against the people that we are threatening. Let's take the young lady here at the front.
Hello, George. My name is Fozia. Regarding Donald Trump, or President Donald Trump, shall I say, for me, it's worrying. One, as a member of the public. Two, I'm black. He was a bit racist, some of the comments he said in his campaign. I'm a Muslim, and he showed discrimination towards certain cultures and ethnic backgrounds. And just generally, it's sad to know that in 2016, there's someone who could publicly stand out and say all the things that he said and to have won. And what's even more worrying is that people didn't vote for him because they believed that he was competent for the job. They voted for him because they didn't want Hillary Trump to win. And is that a good thing for us, or is that a good thing for America? That's just my opinion. Because it's, for example, if you apply for a job, if you don't have the experience, you wouldn't get the job. They look for people who have the experience. Whereas Donald Trump, he doesn't have a political background. He's a businessman. Yes, he's good at what he does. He makes money. He's a billionaire. But should he be the leader of like one of the most powerful countries in the world? And for me, that's just something that just doesn't sit well with me. And everyone has said here is we think he will do this. We hope he will do this. We're optimistic that that will happen. But that's the thing, we don't know. And is that a good thing that we don't know?
Well, the point that you've ended on is the most important one. We hope and think that Trump will be better on this and that. But we know that Clinton would have been worse. Because she told us she would be, because she had the experience, and we saw her experience, we saw her attitude over Libya and Syria and other conflicts in the world. We know that she would have been a disaster. We don't know that Trump will be. Therefore, we're entitled to hope and, in some respects, think that he's going to be better. Look, I understand the point that you make. Myself, I don't believe that Trump has anything against black people. I think he does have things against Muslim people. He is a WASP. He probably doesn't know many Muslims, and he's probably never spoken to many women like you. It's entirely the business of the United States and nobody else who they let into their country. If he doesn't want to let you or me into his country, that's his right as the president. Frankly, I don't want to go, and neither should you. There are many other places that we can go where we'll be more welcome. If he wants to build a wall in his country, that's entirely his business. It's entirely the business of the American people, whether they have walls, fences, or cameras, or whatever. These are domestic, internal United States political affairs, and I respect their right to deal with that. I also insist that they should not interfere in our affairs. President Obama came here during the European referendum and threatened us. As a matter of fact, he did the same on the Scottish referendum. I was on the same side as him then. But he had no business coming here to tell us we'll be at the back of the queue if we leave the European Union. Personally, I wanted to be at the back of the queue, so I was grateful for his threat rather than cowed by it or diverted by it. There's no point in giving someone a job because they've got experience if all their experience is bad. If we can see the results of their experience, that's the point I would make to you overarchingly. Yes, sir.
Well, George, President Obama ordered his administration to shut down the detention centers in Guantanamo Bay.
They're still open. In fact, he's spending more money on them.
That's right. And he could not close the detention centers. And on the contrary, you know, Trump in his campaigns all through said, we have plenty of bad guys and we would like to put them there. And my question is whether do you think that President-elect Trump, he will make more Guantanamo prison centers? Thank you.
Well, frankly, I'd rather have somebody that says I'm going to keep Guantanamo open than somebody who gets elected by claiming that he's going to close Guantanamo Bay. Because one of them is honest and the other one's a liar. I always prefer an honest right-wing person like Charlie than some liberal, bleeding heart that pretends to be one thing but is in fact something completely different. Having mentioned Charlie, I better let him respond.
I was going to say you'll probably find better human rights there than on the other side of the island, but I don't want to get into a big argument with you. I'm winding you on that one. I don't find my country to be racist. There is racism, yes. I think one thing, though, that may be a little bit harder over in the States compared to here is they don't separate necessarily the culture from the politics, from the religion, which is kind of unique to Islam. When you have, you know, this sort of political Islam, the types of the bin Ladens, etc. Not as many people would see necessarily people in hijabs. I mean, I see people in hijabs and burqas and what have you on my high street, so it's not unusual to me. But that said, Dearborn is the biggest, I believe, Muslim community outside of the Middle East, and it's a whole different attitude where people...
Even the police are supporters of Hezbollah. Trust me on that.
Okay.
They've all taken pictures with me in Dearborn, and they're big supporters inside Hassan Nasrallah.
Yeah, and they'll fly American flags outside their homes, and they, you know, very middle class, and it's a religion. But you know, I'm still again expecting to be a positive future for the United States. You know, we do have certain ideals. And I think Mr. Obama tried to live to what he thought were those ideals, but didn't quite understand. You know, he could not explain American exceptionalism. I don't think Donald Trump would have trouble explaining what that is. I don't want to force anybody to be free, but you know, we believe in freedom, we believe in liberty, we do see ourselves as a shining beacon, and yeah, we get a lot of things wrong. I don't sidestep from that, but the future will be, I think, very good. And you'll be surprised. Maybe in 4 to 8 years, I'll come back.
I hope that God gives us breath and we're both still here.
I'm trying to get 4 to 8 weeks. I'd be happy.
This, you didn't want to open up an argument with me on Cuba, and I don't want to open up one with you on what you've just said. But if you're exceptional, that means I'm less than exceptional. And I cannot accept this.
That's not what it means. You said this last time we got together. Let me very quickly explain. What was exceptional was the uniqueness of how we were founded. We were founded on an idea. Anybody can be an American. I can live in Scotland for 40 years and I'll never be Scottish. I mean, I'm not English, even though I have a British passport. You could come and become an American, and overnight, you know, my mother was born in Poland. I don't have any kind of, I don't look Polish. I don't look like I'm from Ukraine, which is where my family was from. I'm an American. We were born on an idea, and that's what makes us exceptional. That's what makes us different.
There are many countries born on ideas, but we'll not divert the argument down there. Charles, the last word, I think, to you.
A quick comment on that. I'm very much hoping that regardless of what, for example, the incoming head of the CIA has said, for example, about torture and so on, that America under Donald Trump will indeed respect that kind of individualism, or rather exceptionalism, in terms of America being founded on liberty and the rights of man, and that those are also upheld by this new administration. Can I very quickly come back to something, a very good point that one of our friends from Chagos Island said, and I'll allude to that. He's right. The system of global alliances, the balance of global power is changing. We have often said in our media, oh, Putin is isolated, Russia is isolated, China is isolated. They've never been isolated from the majority of the world, from China, from India, from South America, from Africa, from much of East Europe. And that is even more the situation now. I think Trump, and I hope Trump, with his business head, with his ability to make deals rather than just break deals and seek confrontation, will see that the world is changing towards a system where trade is enhanced, and in that way security is enhanced, and of course interdependent. And that means, as Trump recognises, not starting wars, attempting to overthrow other countries and other regimes, and largely not, if you like, subordinating your foreign policy, as America, I believe, has done over the last few years, to one or two other countries, Israel, Saudi Arabia, Qatar, countries like this, whose interests are absolutely not aligned, I would argue, with the true interests of the United States. If he takes good advice, if he doesn't make himself vulnerable to those that are subject to pressure groups and interest groups represented by those external interests, he may turn out to be a very good president.
A good friend of mine, not just a Jewish friend, but a former, at least, Israeli citizen, once made the point to me that left-wing people are extraordinarily cheaply bought. You see, what did Clinton get? Let's say she got 100 million in her pocket. Compared to Donald Trump's wealth, that's nothing. Donald Trump doesn't need grubby, blood-stained, oil-stained dollars from the tyrants of Saudi Arabia. But Hillary Clinton did, and took them. I'm looking forward, all I want from an American president is that he sits down across a table with somebody and says, let's cut a deal, where there's something in it for you and there's something in it for us. I'm not asking him to develop a conscience or still less an ideology. Just be practical. Just act in your own country's interest rather than acting in the interests of somebody else's country because they bought you, and bought you extraordinarily cheaply at that. And I have a hope that Trump will be such a president. He doesn't need money. He doesn't actually even need a second term, though he probably will end up, as they all usually do, in going for one.
Doesn't need an airplane either.
He doesn't need an airplane. He's got his own airplane. He doesn't need a Blair Force One. And his whole career has been built on trading, dealing, cutting deals with people that were mutually advantageous. And that's all we ask for, I think, from a US president. That and the absence of war. It's often thought that the right-wing party, the more right-wing party, the Republicans, must be the party of war. But that's not true, as you very well know. Richard Nixon was the man who brokered a peace with China. He reached out, him and Kissinger, and made an historic agreement with China that for decades now has been mutually productive and profitable for both parties. Obama has bombed more people than George W. Bush bombed. The British bullied the United States into bombing and destroying Libya. The British are still demanding war in Syria, when President-elect Trump is saying, no more war in Syria. Let's combine and unite to crush ISIS and Al-Qaeda. So I've got some hopes. I understand the young lady's anxieties. They're well-founded. I don't believe that racism began in America in November. It existed long before that. Under a black president, black people have been gunned down in the streets every other day in the United States. Bill Clinton, often described as the first black president, though he's not black, he had a lot of support from black people, put a small nation's worth of black people in prison, where they languish in the most shocking circumstances. So I don't believe that you can blame Trump for this any more than you can blame Brexit for racism in Britain. There's always been racism in Britain. We went around the world taking other people's countries and slaughtering them and stealing their things on the basis we were racially superior to them. The United States, though Charlie doesn't like to hear it, is a country built on the genocide of the native people and the enslavement of the African people that were brought there, usually by us, to be our slaves. So racism long predates Donald Trump. And again, my final word, I believe that Trump likes a good time. He wants to make good times for America. He'll be judged on that. He'll either go down as the most disastrous president ever or the most surprising. I've been George Galloway. This has been كلمة حرة on Al Mayadeen Television. Thank you for watching.